Translation. After this incident, the Lord blessed Haridas Thakur and vanquished the offence of his mother at the home of Advaita Acharya. Purport. On the Mahaprakash day, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu embraced Haridas Thakur and informed him that he was none other than an incarnation of Prahlad Maharaj. When Vishvarupa took sannyas, Sachimata thought that Advaita Acharya had persuaded him to do so. Therefore she accused him of this, which was an offence at Advaita Acharya's lotus feet. Later, Lord Chaitanya induced his mother to take the dust of Advaita Acharya's lotus feet, and thus her Vaishnava aparad was nullified. Om Gantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Scha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishvari Rishavanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Hare. So this 17th chapter is a summary of Lord Chaitanya's youthful pastimes. In later detail they'll be dealt with in the Chaitanya Chaitamrita. So first there's 2 points here. One is how Sachimata, the mother of Lord Chaitanya, committed some offence at the lotus feet of Advaita Acharya. Another point here is that Lord Chaitanya showered his blessings on Haridas Thakur. Yes, so Vaishnava Parad, I mean, this last time I was here we dealt with this. It's like, it's an ongoing subject. So it seems like a pretty important subject if it keeps being mentioned. But we'll deal with it a little bit in this particular talk. So prevention's better than cure. Everybody knows that. You know, you get a disease, like just lately we've had flu in the ashram. You know, some have had it for 3 months. And but you know, if you take the proper medicine at the right time, you don't get it. I don't know about flu, but heavy colds anyway. In India, they've got one prevention. It's some concoction. As soon as you start getting a runny nose or sneezing, you spray it up your nose, and that's it, finished. So now they've got, what is it? I forget what firm it is. Anyway, they've got a Western equivalent. It's it's chemical, but it works. You go into Boots. Boots is cheaper than the supermarket, actually. You go into Boots and you get this. It's a squirt. It's like a pointed piece, and you press it, and it squirts out this liquid, and you stick it up your nose and give it a few squirts, and actually you don't get cold. You're starting to sweat, and there's so many things, but then it goes away. And if it's first time it doesn't work, then you take some more, and up to 36 hours. This is not an advertisement, but but the longer you leave it, then after some time you can't actually. You have to go through the cold. You have to get the symptoms. You have to get the results of not dealing with it. So it's the same with Vaishnava Aparad. If we don't deal with it in the very beginning, then it just escalates and it can become out of hand, and that's not good for a Vaishnava. It's not recommended at all. So Vaishnava Aparad, it starts in the mind. There's no offences in the Kali Yuga for offences in the mind. But, if you leave something in the mind, what will happen? Will it go away? It's just like, whoop, whoop, whoop. It'll go big. And eventually, you leave the mind to attach itself to anything, and it just like really makes a mountain out of a molehill. And so this is where we have to deal with the mind. This is this whole process of yoga is to control the mind. If we do that once, it's like the root. We get to the root of the problem. Let me get in there. We get down to the root, and then everything else is solved. Is that right? If you start snipping at the leaves, it's still going to be there. We're not going to solve it. So I thought we'd deal just a little bit about the mind. I mean, the mind is like an unchaste wife. If you've got a wife who's unchaste, you've got a big problem. And, it says that because in the Vedic custom you can't, it's the same for a husband as well, don't worry. In the Vedic custom, you're not allowed to divorce. Now, nowadays, if you've got a wife who's running off, then it's all right, fair enough. And then you just go and you get somebody else, don't you? That's the standard. But in the Vedic custom, one man, one wife. You have to stick with a situation, and you have to see this is my karma, I have to deal with it. Otherwise, society, everybody's here, there, and everywhere. At least it's the best of a bad bargain. And so what does a person have to do? What does a man have to do, the husband? Is he attentive? He's very careful that, she's not left alone, or that, there's some precaution, so she's not going with a paramour. And if he doesn't do that, then eventually, there's some extramarital relationships, and then there's, maybe even, let's get rid of this husband. This sometimes happens. The eternal triangle, we've heard of that, haven't we? The eternal triangle. And so what happens is that, the husband is actually murdered or something like that. All because the husband didn't keep control of his unchaste wife. So the mind's like that. If we don't control this mind, then it's going to cause so many problems. Or another example, what about the tiger? Have you got any tiger hunters in here? If you capture a tiger, what do? After a while you get used to it. It's a tiger. What's the problem? I've had it for like last 3 or 4 years. It should be all right now. So you start to, you don't be so careful. Then what happens? When you look in, the tiger, finished. So, we all know what we should all know anyway, even if we're not, we should all know what the cure is. The cure is Mam chayo avyabhitrena bhakti yogena sevate sargunam samatityetam brahma bhuya kalpate. That if we engage in constant devotional service and we don't let the mind go, then very easily we come to the Brahman platform. We're no longer in the material world. The mind is actually fixed in Brahman. Devotional service is Brahman. And what's one of the symptoms of Brahman? One of the symptoms is peace. We're not influenced by the modes of nature. We're not focusing on the modes of nature. We're focusing on devotional service. So devotional service has to be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. And so that means that, it's not meant for satisfying us. That's what we may think, that I'm feeling really satisfied in this service. And then we may have to change. We may see this as not actually the thing. But actually, a devotee has to come to the point where this lifetime is not for enjoying, not directly through sense gratification. That's the first thing we have to understand. It's really meant for, let's get out of this place. Just let's get out. And whatever it takes to get out, we'll do. And so a devotee has the outlook that whatever I'm faced with in devotional service, this is Krishna's mercy. Let me deal with it. Let me deal with it in devotional service. Hot and cold. What else is there? Heat and summer and winter. Good, bad. Man, woman. This, that, the other. This is all actually material. A devotee is only focused on devotional service. And then peace. What's the peace formula? These are simple examples. The peace formula is Bhaktaram Yogitapasam, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, Suridam Sarvabhutanam, Gatpaman, Shantim Richati. So there's 3 items in this particular verse. One is Suridam Sarvabhutanam. Krishna is the well-wishing friend of all living entities. If we can actually understand that, then we can actually be peaceful. But we may not be able to understand that straight away in devotional service. So there's 2 other angles. What's the other 2? Is the enjoyer of all our activities. This is not necessarily enlivening. But anyway, he's the enjoyer of all activities. It's just stressing that Krishna is the enjoyer. We should give Krishna enjoyment. But the last one is actually very important, is that Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. That he's in control. He's in control of every single thing. And so if a devotee can come to that realization that in this life, in this particular endeavor to perform devotional service, that Krishna's in control. He's in control of what? The 3 modes of material nature. And when we engage in service, he takes care of the 3 modes of material nature. There's a nice... is the Bhagavad Gita here? You have one? No? In the 5th chapter, text 13 to 16, it explains this process very nicely about the misidentification of the living entity. No, it's all right. Here we are. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of the 9 gates, the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done. So this is the point, is we have to control our nature, control the mind. The mind is the root problem. And how do we control the mind? Maha Mantra. And so this is actually the surrender of devotional service. We hear this word surrender. You have to surrender, Prabhu. It's not so prominent as it used to be. It was every other word. But now, devotees won't accept that. Wait a minute, what do I have to surrender to? I've been a little bit more thoughtful. But surrender, what's the first surrender? Is the only real surrender is japa. If we get that surrender correct, then everything else will be okay, relatively speaking. Because just think about it, everything else is coming from that. There's a rich man, he's got so much wealth and so many facilities he can provide, but nobody asks him. so he doesn't provide. Maybe he doesn't want. A devotee, when we're chanting japa, we're asking to be engaged completely in devotional service and protected. So that to the degree that a devotee can actually absorb himself in that mood of hearing the holy name, even if we're not aware of the philosophy, if we hear very nicely the Maha Mantra, then all of a sudden the mind will become completely pacified. And what's the result of a pacified mind? Where do aparads come from? Where do aparads come from? From the mind, but there's a certain one of the qualities of the mind when it's not. I'm going to say when it's not satisfied. Dissatisfaction, isn't it? If we're not satisfied, then there'll be envy. This is the choice we have in the spiritual world. We can either be satisfied with the service of Krishna, or we can try and find satisfaction somewhere else. And when Krishna gives us that free will. If we decide not to be satisfied with that situation for some reason, Prabhupada said, don't worry about it. Somehow we made this wrong decision. But, so satisfaction. And satisfaction of the mind comes from the Maha Mantra. When we're actually satisfied in devotional service, we're not bothered about anything else, are we? The 6 Goswamis. They hardly had enough to eat, but they were satisfied. Raghunath Das Goswami, he had so much opulence, it's unbelievable. Far more opulent than people nowadays. But he tried to run away. He wanted to be with Lord Chaitanya. I'm sure everybody in this room has had that experience, either to a lesser or greater degree in devotional service, that, if we really absorb it, some days it's like just completely blissful and, everything just falls into place. And if we really analyse why that happens, is that maybe we put a little bit more attention into his japa. There's more comes out of the bead bag than his hand. I remember there's one devotee, I call him Dr. Fakir Mohan. Now, he was a initiated, he still is actually, initiated Vaishnava. He was a disciple of Gaur Govinda Swami. He was a friend of Gaur Govinda Swami. He's a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, is he? I didn't know that. Maybe. Yeah? Dr. Fakir Mohan. Oh. Yeah. He used to come here and give class. And I once picked him up from his flat in Boreham he was staying. And he's so humble. It's unbelievable. And he used to give class. And, every time he came, he never ventured from giving class on the holy name. And when he gave class, everybody were like that. And then they started reaching for the bead bags. Because he was so convinced. Nam Prabhu, he said. And, it's also stuck with me that every time I feel that things are not going right in devotional service, I just think about, Dr. Fakir Mohan's complete dependence on the holy name. Then we overcome the modes of nature. And even in this life, we experience spiritual life. Iha yasya hare dasya kamana manasagira nikilash bhavastasu jivan mukta sahujite. Jivan mukta means liberated. This is what it means to be liberated in devotional service. The simple process is given by Prabhupada. He says that anybody who chants 16 rounds of the Maha Mantra and follows 4 regulative principles and obviously engages in devotional service, they're considered liberated. It's a liberated platform. How is that? We don't feel liberated. Maybe we're not doing it properly, that's all. Prabhupada's on about if you absorb yourself in these things, then we're not in the material world. We're actually spiritual world. Then there's no envy. Aparads come from thinking that somebody's got something better than us. And we don't like it. And therefore, even in subtle ways, we might not think, well, that wasn't the case. This is the real reason behind it, is that somebody has got something better than us. But if we've got the best, if we've got, a Krishna conscious mind, if we're completely satisfied, there's no envy. There's no apparatus. So this is the real cure. We have to know the philosophy, of course, that, it's like bite the bullet philosophy. It means that even though we don't want to do it, we do it because we know we're trying to, we don't commit apparatus because we went for a higher cause, or we try not to. But sooner or later, unless the mind's controlled, it'll come. And so, this is the real panacea. So this is the surrender. As they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. I think everybody can relate to that, can't they, with japa? It's like it's such a simple thing to do, theoretically, but it's such a difficult thing to do, practically. And so this is why we have the process of devotional service. It's like a barometer. Our japa is a barometer of the day. We chant our japa in a certain way, then the day will see that it'll go a certain way. There'll be certain things which come. Why? This is actually to remind us that, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. Why is it, last year or a few years ago, I could do things, and now it's difficult. Why is it this, it's because of this. This is my experience. That, so as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. As we control the mind, Krishna rewards us accordingly. There's another way of looking at it. We've heard this example of the mad elephant offence. If we can't control this tendency to criticise, then there'll be some reaction. And actually, you may have heard this story about. Has anybody seen a mad elephant? Yeah? And lived. In India, if there's a mad elephant, they just cordon the whole area off. There's nothing they can do. You can imagine, I don't know, what does an elephant weigh? About 4 or 5 tons. 4 or 5 tons running about. You're not going to stop that. And what they do, they don't even let vehicles go into the area. If a vehicle strays into the area where the mad elephant is, and the elephant sees it, that piece of tin around is not going to protect you. The elephant just doosh, and then if there's anything left inside, it pokes its tusks in and tries to finish everything off that way. It just becomes completely berserk. So, there was a story of, there was 2 brahmacharis. It was in India somewhere. I'm not sure where it was, but they were on a morning walk, chanting the japa, and they turned this corner, and there it was, an elephant. Can anybody make that noise? Making a noise through its trunk, and they saw it, and immediately they turned and they started to run, and they were running, but is an elephant fast? It's faster than a man anyway. And so they were running, and they were looking over the shoulder. First it were 100 yards away, and then they looked over after a few seconds, 75 yards. Looked like 50 yards. And they were like, And so they looked on, and one of them, suddenly, looking back, deja vu. He remembered something a wise old person told him. He told him what to do if you ever see a mad elephant. And it came to his mind at that time. And he says, this way. And so they both turned and they started running. And after some time, 25 yards away, after some time they came to this slope. And so they both started running down this slope. Some they fell over, were rolling down it, getting up again, running. bumping into trees. And this slope was quite a long slope and quite steep. And eventually they got to the bottom and they looked round, and guess what they saw? The elephant was at the top of the hill and it couldn't get down. It must be the mass of the elephant. If it starts after a certain slope, it just starts going head over heels and, it kills itself. So it was tentatively trying to, but it couldn't do it. So even if we are not intelligent enough to chant as japa nicely, the next one is we should, follow this process of practicing Trinada Pisani Chenata Rada Pishishnai. Just like they went downhill, we have to be going down obeisances. If we commit Vaishnava Aparad, there's 3 ways we can deal with it. One is that we offer our respects and ask for apologies. But sometimes, if somebody's really hurt and we've really done the dirty on somebody, it does happen, doesn't it? They're going to say, okay, with a smile on their face, but inside they're going to be really... And so we're going to feel that. And so sometimes that may happen. So then it tells us that we should serve that devotee. That softens a lot of hearts when somebody comes up and they actually serve you. You offer your service. They think, it really loosens things up. But there still might be a little bit there. And so then we come back to the same thing we should have done in the first place. We have to chant japa. He says we should incessantly chant japa, or as much as possible. Because eventually by chanting in the proper consciousness for a long period of time, we'll eventually get relief. So it comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? It's all down to our chanting. So that's one particular topic in this purport. Next one is Haridas Thakur. He said he got the blessings of Lord Chaitanya. Everybody's getting blessings. This blessing, this material world. Some people come up and say, "Give me a blessing." It's full of blessings. This material world. Everywhere we go, we're getting blessed. Everything we do is a blessing. Whatever happens, it's a blessing. Is it? Is that right? Because, sooner or later we realize, I can't enjoy. That's the biggest blessing. Coming to the realization, I can't enjoy. This material world is not meant for enjoyment. So it's all blessings. So Krishna's working through the material energy in that way. And then we can think, there's only one alternative, and that's devotional service. To really absorb ourselves in it. I went to a funeral on Thursday, and I was going to come down earlier, but then what it was actually, in January I got a letter from a devotee who used to be in Manchester, and when I opened it, he was apologising. I'd been associating with him in Manchester maybe 25, 30 years ago, and he was in the temple for about 6 or 7 years. And he was explaining how he apologising for any offences that he had committed and all these things. And he said, I know the process of devotional service. He admitted that I knew the process, but he wasn't really following it properly. And at the end, I was looking for the address. He didn't put a return address. So I thought, I'll write back. And then I rang somebody who he was contacting up to a couple of years ago, and he said, I think they were moving. So at that I thought, he's probably moved by now, so I didn't write. But anyway, a few days later, or a few weeks later, it was bothering me. This, maybe I should write, maybe I shouldn't. And about 2 weeks later, I got a Facebook message from one devotee saying that this devotee was missing. It's in Manchester, and so then I was in Manchester at that time, and then the police came and they were concerned and they were he'd last been seen at a certain place, and then 1 week went by, 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by, and then all of a sudden one of his friends was on a run on the moors near Oldham, it was, and he was with a friend and they were running, and she dropped back, so he turned round to encourage her, and then he saw this body, and he knew who it was. He'd gone off his beaten track where he used to run to run in this different, so he knew that something had guided him there, and immediately knew, and it was actually this devotee. Mind. This is the mind. The mind is so powerful. Even though we've got everything to cure all those problems, if we don't conquer this mind, it'll take us to the most difficult situations. Can you imagine? So, anyway, I wasn't going to speak about that, but this is... so I went to the funeral on Thursday, and we saw this devotee off. Of course, devotional service has been performed, Krishna will see the service. But it means at some point we have to roll the sleeves up and do what we should have done previously. It's not that we can go past anything in devotional service. Like if we know somebody in the material world, we can go to that person and say, can you, and he'll help us to get round a certain obstacle. He can find us a job because he's in a certain, this happens in the material world, doesn't it? It's who you know. But in devotional service, you have to do the needful. It's also who you know. If we actually start to understand Krishna and how to actually serve him nicely, then Prabhupada said once, he says we have to be 100% pure to go back to Godhead. All the devotees. Then he saw everybody, he says, anyway, 75%. and then he got up off the Vyasasana and he started to walk out. He threw his children over his shoulders. He looked back and said, anyway, I've got the back door key to Vaikuntha. So the same thing is there, that, if we know someone in the material world, we can get, around things. If we actually know Krishna well enough, we can get around things. This is the process of devotional. So usually we have to go through so much toil, so much austerity, so much abnegation, and it's all on us. We have to do it. I'm going to do it. But that devotee who can just wait a minute, I can't do it. I've got to make the effort, but I can't do it. And that's when we can start to chant japa. I'm depending on Krishna. This is the whole... Krishna wants to see that real desire to go back to Godhead, and it's coming through the bead bag. So we have that contact who can take us round every day, every minute of every day. We just saw in a kirtan now, how is it that everybody, a few hours later, or, just as we got up this morning, we didn't exactly feel like that, did we? You know what I mean? And even at the beginning of a kirtan, sometimes it's like tap, 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 First of all, there's no movement. Then, the knee starts going a little bit. Then we start tapping a little bit. Then, we start to become a little bit motivated. And then we start listening more. And then what happens, we start to become animated. And then, somebody will drag out and we're in the kirtan. We get, devotee who's fired up, brings us in, and we get that little bit of lift from that touch. That's what it's supposed to be like all the time. Vrakishvar Pandit, he chanted for and danced for 3 days on the trot. When Prabhupada was at Rath Yatra, he was in his early 70s. It's not a time to be... It's not usually a time when people are chanting and dancing, you know what I mean? It's like, it's all on to, just get about for a lot of people at that age. But, Prabhupada started dancing. He was dancing for a long time and devotees were getting frightened, He's 70-odd years old. So yeah, we're not the body. It takes us beyond the body. This hearing process. If we're not good at philosophy, all right, don't worry. If we're not good at, anything else in devotional service, don't worry. But as long as we can hear the Maha Mantra, then we've got everything. Prabhupada said we can chant at our leisure. A simple process of hearing and we can chant at our leisure. In any situation, whether we're outside the temple, inside the temple. And if we're a little bit literate, Prabhupada says, we can listen to philosophy. So which is more important? We listen to philosophy just to convince us we should chant Hare Krishna, actually. But, the same way, if we can keep chanting, even if we're not actually very attached to philosophy or other aspects of devotion, if we keep hearing and chanting, then we'll realize, actually, this is the philosophy of life, like Maharaj was saying yesterday. This is actually what Lord Chaitanya does. In the spiritual world, you never... I don't know whether you do, actually. Does anybody sit down reading books about philosophy in the spiritual world? Maybe, I don't know. Usually, they actually performing so many... They're playing, aren't they? Krita punya punya, due to pious activities. People, mundane consciousness cannot understand the spiritual world. The mundane person thinks that Krishna is an ordinary person. A jnani thinks that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What else is there? A yogi thinks something else. They're all thinking something round the subject matter. But he says they don't realise and they can't understand that these cowherd boys, it's talking about the cowherd boys playing with Krishna, they're playing with Krishna just like an ordinary boy. And they don't know he's Krishna. And they're enjoying life. Why Krita Punya Punya? Because of heaps and heaps of pious activities. Has anybody got heaps and heaps of pious activities? Put your hand up. Nobody. I don't know about that, actually. To perform in devotional service, in one respect, there's a lot of pious activity. But, just by hearing the holy name regularly, so much piety. And we've gone back on the subject matter again, actually. I was going to talk about blessings and material world. And we flipped back to the holy name, didn't we? But I know one devotee. Do you think... I want you to judge whether this is a blessing or not, right? He went to Mira Road Hospital to have some work on his sinuses. And so, what they do, they stick a needle in your arm and next thing you know, you're waking up and you're in the recovery ward. But he didn't come with him. All his body was completely zonked. He couldn't move an eyelid. He couldn't do anything. But for some reason, this effect of this anaesthetic, he could hear everything that was happening, and he could feel everything. He says, so they started sticking this scalpel up his nose and... Can you imagine? You can't do anything. And somebody's scraping up the inside of your nose, and the pain's intolerable. And so when he came out of the anaesthetic, obviously there was a big relief, and he told one senior devotee about this, and he expected a little bit of sympathy. And this devotee said, Nectar, Prabhu. Nectar. It's frightening, isn't it? The material world's a frightening place. Yes, so three types of... what's the three types of blessings? I can remember two of them. One is by the glances of the Lord. Sideward. Even a pure devotee has got the Shakti of Krishna, depending on his purity. He can also give blessings by that. What else is there? By the touch. By the touch of a devotee. He can, when we embrace, we get blessings. What's the other one? Well wishes. When somebody really wants to wish us well, we get, when Krishna's Krishna's a well-wisher. And he's given us everything we need, but maybe we can't utilize everything properly. So this is why association of devotees is so important. That even though we can't see Krishna very well, we can't appreciate Krishna very well, we can actually see and we can hear and we can touch and we can reciprocate with devotees. And so if we actually please devotees, they're so kind-hearted, think, I really like this devotee. I hope he really does well in devotional service. That'll naturally come. And, this is a quick way to make advancement in devotional service. We don't have to be what's this so-called advanced devotee doing so much service. We just have to please devotees. So that's the other thing. Two really important things is hear the holy name nicely and try and serve and please devotees. So that way we get the blessings and we avoid offences. So we can stop there. If anybody's got any questions or any comments, we can take them now.